We'll send it out after today's training. Secondly, the training will take about 90 minutes, and that's going to include questions. And to keep in mind that we're going to be using the chat box. Normally, I do this talk in person, which is ideal, but I hope I can offer you a very user-friendly program today. And if you would be so kind as to use the chat box, and I'll get to as many questions as I can. The way you do that is to go to your Zoom bar at the top, or I guess at the bottom, and click on chat. The box will open up and you can add your question. There may be some questions today that I don't get to, or that I just don't have time to answer. They're lengthy questions, and I'm going to record the questions as well and get back to you with them. So you'll be email with anything to finish those up. And also, we're going to have an evaluation at the end as well, and the link to that will be at the very end in the chat box. I really encourage you to provide us some feedback. Now, if some of you are new to Zoom, it would help if you would go up within your video and click the mute button so that there's no noise coming from your environment, and that will really help all of us to hear better. If you could do that now, we could move along. All right, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start by making sure that you understand what you or your clients can get from DLCV in terms of some of the things that we offer. For example, if you and/or your client have a disability rights related concern, beyond Social Security, you or they can call DLCV, and this can either be together or apart. And that would be on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8:30 to 4. We have an advocate who stands by and waits for these calls. And when she gets them, she listens to the issue, and then she assigns a subject matter expert. And that person's going to assist. And usually they're able to call back within a day or two. Sometimes it's not right away that day. And then that subject matter expert can delve into detail on the issue. Now, in some instances, it does involve referral. Of course, that would be expected, but in other instances, the issue may actually meet one of our objectives, in which case it would be assigned to an advocate, perhaps that advocate, for what we call case services. So this is a wonderful opportunity for people to call in with the entire gamut of disability-related questions. Other assistance we can provide related to Social Security is, for example, I am the subject matter expert on Social Security. I can address a wide range of issues and questions related to getting a benefit and keeping a benefit. And then there's also other advocates who can address issues of overpayments, how to use ticket to work, work incentives. So again, I think of us as sort of a full range service that can really help your clients use the Social Security programs. We also have a wonderful online Social Security resource, and you'll notice in this slide the link to that right on our website. And that webpage has a great deal of information, once again, about getting and keeping a benefit. We have some videos, and it's all user-friendly information. There's even links within the guides to help people connect with Social Security. And last, I host quarterly Social Security clinics. And these are private 60 to 90-minute consultations on a Social Security matter, again, related to applying, appealing, or perhaps undergoing a review. And these are much more in-depth than when you're dealing with me as a subject matter expert, or when that case has been referred and I'm taking, a half hour, 45 minutes to talk with you about the situation. This is where I can go into a great deal of detail. I can review paperwork from Social Security, I can read documentation, and really help you shape a case for yourself, or maybe figure out why you're being denied, what you can do to strengthen your case. As I said, they're quarterly, they're free, they're private. In fact, we're using the Zoom platform to keep them personal. So transportation isn't an issue. And the next one is probably coming up in December, and I encourage anybody interested in one of those, this would be clients primarily, to check our website because they'll be posted probably mid-November. Okay. Now, this is really exciting to me, and I hope you'll all listen up. It is pending board approval, but we are about to add to our list of services with respect to Social Security the possibility for what are called case consultations. These are similar to the clinics I just mentioned, but they're different in one way. They're designed for you, the case manager. Okay, so you've got a client you're dealing with a very problematic Social Security issue. You just don't know how to advise them and you need some expert involvement. You can set up a consultation with me. This would include the client, and together we'll figure it out. Okay, we'll troubleshoot the issue. And again, you know, there's no time restriction on this. It's just a question of getting the issue resolved. Now, I can't promise this is going to happen, but I mention it because I'm 99% sure. After the training, probably by into early October, you'll all be getting an email with more details about this new service. Okay, so let's move on to the meat of the matter. What is the goal of this training? My goal, and I hope your goal, would be to improve your overall skills and knowledge around Social Security. And so that if not now, maybe one day you would kind of think of yourself as an expert in Social Security, or at least you're moving in that direction. Now, I know there's a wide disparity of knowledge currently among you all, and I do appreciate that. And some of what I talk about today may be old news for some of you, or it may be review, and for some of you, it may be brand new. But basically, I want you to understand how the programs work and the various processes that dictate them. I want you to understand the specific programs and also how the reviews work in terms of obtaining and maintaining benefits. I'd also like you to understand what the determination process consists of. There's actually 6 steps in making the decision. It's not just checking a box off, yeah, they appear disabled. There's a highly intensive process that they go through, and you can just imagine the number of regulations that govern each step. But I'm going to introduce you to those steps because in knowing what it takes to get approved is going to help in proving the case, because then you know what documentation is needed. And I'm also going to talk about how to facilitate the documentation, because that is really critical. I also want to help you understand what actions you can take as case managers to help your clients get approved. Now, I realize you may have some limitations within your CSB or just within your general practice of case management. And so if something I suggest is not something you're able to do for that reason, that's fine. But just be aware that they are tips. Maybe you could pass them on to the family who's primarily assisting or something like that. And then last, I just want to make sure that you do understand all the ways DLCV can support you or your clients while they're seeking or to obtain or maintain a benefit. So think of yourself as your client's frontal lobe. I don't mean to be crass, but you know, as mental health professionals, you all know that the frontal lobe is that part of the brain that enables you to plan, execute, organize. It's the executive functioning. And you all have already proved that you can do that, or you wouldn't be case managers. And so you very well have the skills that your clients are likely missing. And that's why you play such a critical role in helping them obtain these benefits. Okay, so next we're going to talk about I call it Social Security 101 because it really is basic, but you really do need to know the difference between SSI, SSDI, and the healthcare program that goes with each. So as I said, this may be review for some of you, but I think it will be helpful. I'd like to start this by talking about how you know what they're getting, and if they present to you an issue, you can ask them to show you the most recent letter they've gotten from Social Security. And up in the left-hand corner of that letter, it will say Social Security Administration, and then it will say one of 2 programs, either Survivors, Disability, and Retirement, and that's going to be SSDI, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then it will state the reason for the communication. It could say overpayment, it could say notice of determination, whatever. Or it's going to say Social Security Administration, Supplemental Security Income, which of course stands for SSI, and then the reason for the communication. So you can very easily say they've brought you 5 letters and they're totally confused. You can divide up the letters. Now, if they're only getting SSI, obviously they're all coming from the SSI program, but some people do have both programs. And so you may get different letters. Okay, so that's just sort of an organizational technique so you can get yourself on the same page with Social Security on what your client's being told. Okay, now I've mentioned SSDI, I've mentioned SSI. So you'll know the medical criteria for these programs are identical. The difference has more to do with the financial criteria and what it takes financially to be able to access them. So let's start with SSI. This program is for people who either have no work credits or very limited work credits. And I'll discuss credits in a moment under SSDI. Basically, they're a low-income individual. They have virtually no or limited resources. And because this is a needs-based program, there are financial limits, and they can't have more than $2,000 in assets, and there has to be limited income in the household in general. Okay, otherwise it may reduce their SSI or actually exclude them from SSI altogether. Say a spouse has work income, for example, that could rule it out. SSI, as a needs-based program, can apply to children with disabilities. It can apply to adults with disabilities. And many people don't realize this, but it also can apply to the elderly, 65 and older. And those individuals do not have to have a disability to qualify for just general SSI. And that can be an outstanding way to add to their income. The current amount of SSI is $783 a month. And that assumes that individual is either living independently and paying all their own expenses, or if they live in the home of another, it implies that they're paying what we call their fair share or contributing with the household expenses. And this is important because if they aren't, and it's not made clear up front that they're going to contribute, Social Security will reduce their benefit by 1/3. It's called the 1/3 reduction. So if you see in somebody's letter from Social Security that they're only getting $550, it's probably because they've suffered this 1/3 reduction. And nobody bothered to tell them that if they just declared up front when they applied that they planned to help out with the expenses, they wouldn't have suffered this 1/3 reduction. Of course, all benefits can have a COLA increase every year, so they do go up a little bit. All right, now on the SSDI, or what we otherwise call disability, this is a program that's dictated by your credits. Now, as employees, you're all earning credits in that system right now and probably have been right along. It takes 20 credits in order to qualify for a disability benefit. And you earn a credit every quarter of the year you're working and earning over $1,360 in that quarter or 3-month period. So really, it doesn't take earning a lot of money to get a credit. You could even be working very part-time and earn a credit. And once your credits reach 20, which translates to 5 years out of the last 10, then you would qualify financially. You still have to go through medical determination, but at least you can get access. Okay, now somebody who has fallen out of employment or who has never worked, this is going to be a problem. Okay, they would be more inclined to apply for the SSI. Now, the amount you get in SSDI is going to relate directly to how much you have paid into the system. So if you're a high earner, you're going to get a higher benefit than a low earner. However, if you're a young person under 30, they actually weight those credits and you can end up with a fairly decent benefit. Okay. Okay, so that's the two programs. Now, which healthcare program goes with which program? First of all, again, I'd like, in the same way that you can have both SSI and SSDI, you can have both Medicaid and Medicare that go with these two programs. SSI usually comes with, always comes with Medicaid, whereas SSDI always comes with Medicare. Now, right up at the top there in the heading, I've given you the link to VICAP. And it's basically Virginia's counseling program for people who are now Medicaid or Medicare recipients. It can really help them choose their program and answer all their questions. It's an outstanding volunteer service. Okay, now with SSI, if you have SSI, then you qualify for what I call full Medicaid. Medicaid with all the bells and whistles. Okay, this is not Medicaid that you get now under the Medicaid expansion program that Virginia just opened up back in 2019, which is still good health care, but it isn't going to come with everything that full Medicaid comes with if you have SSI. Now, you must apply for it separately. So while it's automatic, if you get SSI, you still have to apply for it, which you do by contacting Department of Social Services. Okay, now Medicaid pays almost 100%. It used to pay 100% of one's health care, but I've heard recently that they have, you know, these small copays. They're very small, but still there may be some charges associated with like an office visit or a medication, but it's very small. And there's no premium, so it's really wonderful. Even if you're only getting $1 of SSI, if the SSI has been reduced for various reasons, you can still get Medicaid. That's the beauty of how these are connected. Now, the critical thing for many of you, particularly on the DD side of things, is that, of course, SSI is your gateway to Medicaid, and Medicaid is your gateway to waivers. So it's very important that you understand the connection there, and we're going to talk a little later about how to make sure you can keep your Medicaid in place so you can keep your waivers in place. Okay, now Medicare, on the other hand, unlike Medicaid, which kicks in right away, you know, once you apply, Medicare actually takes 2 years to kick in, and that's after you have satisfied a 5-month waiting period. So just briefly, let's say you apply in November and you miraculously get approved by January 1, which of course never happens. You're going to have to wait until June to actually receive the cash benefit because of that 5-month waiting period. And then you wait 2 years from that time for your Medicare to kick in. Okay. Now, if you happen to also have SSI, of course, you'll have Medicaid all that time. And if you don't have SSI, you can apply now for Medicaid because of Medicaid expansion. So there's really no reason to go without health insurance. Now, in some instances, the income may be too high for Medicaid and you'll have to use clinics and all, but basically you should be able to get access. Now, Medicare only pays 80%, and there's also a fairly large premium for it. So next I'm going to, in a couple slides away, I'm going to talk to you about how to access some programs that help cover some of those expenses. And last, on SSDI, if you're strictly getting that program, you do not have access to waivers, okay? Okay, now there's a third and last program that is one you need to know about. It's called Disabled Adult Child, or DAC for short. And it's for people who are age 18 and older. Now, why is this important? It's important because it's often a higher benefit than an SSI benefit would be. And you can qualify for it under the following conditions. If your disability began before age 22 and one of the following events has occurred, because this is a benefit under a parent's record, so that parent has to either have become disabled themselves and are getting Social Security disability, or they've retired on Social Security retirement, or they're deceased. So often what happens is maybe they've gotten their SSI young, maybe in their 20s, and once they're in their 30s, one of these events takes place. So then you have to know that they really could convert from SSI over to this DAC benefit, as long as they can prove that their disability began before age 22. And I can hear the wheels turning in your head thinking, you know, that can be hard to prove. And it is, because as you know, doctors and various places, they expunge their records after a while. I think 7 years, 10 years maybe. And so I always encourage parents, you know, to collect all of their benefits, especially as children, because those records may come in handy later in life, proving one of these DAC cases. Okay, so keep that in mind. And this other critical thing that happens is that, let's say you convert from SSI over to this DAC program, and it puts you up over the 783 amount of SSI. That's going to cause the SSI to stop because you have too much income, even though it's a disability income. Well, under a special rule, I've listed it here, it's the POMS, and I've listed the number and actually the exact website link to it. There are what are called special groups of former SSI recipients. And if the individual, as I say, had SSI, but they're now going to lose it because they're converting to DAC, they can actually keep their Medicaid. And as we've talked, this is so critical. They keep their Medicaid, and if they're a waiver recipient, they keep their waivers. Okay? So it's real critical to understand how these pieces come together. You may find yourself at Social Security someday with your client showing them this reference, because you know, we all know that these Social Security workers, not all of them know all of the rules. So we don't want anybody losing their Medicaid or their waivers. Okay? All right, and I mentioned earlier that there are ways to subsidize some of these extra expenses associated with Medicare. For example, the Part B premium for Medicare right now is almost $140 some odd. Well, if their Medicare cash benefit is under a certain threshold, they can actually qualify for Medicaid's special programs, one of which is called Extra Help. And Extra Help will actually pay for their medications almost, I would say, like 99%. I mean, you'll get generics for $1 and, you know, brand names for maybe $3. They're really inexpensive. And they'll also pay under the Medicare Savings Program for, like I say, the Part B premium, and then also copays, which, remember I mentioned Medicare is only 80%, so you got this 20% out of pocket. Well, now suddenly that's going to start paying for those. So I always like to think of all the ways people can benefit from this system because it's there for them and it's designed for them. So keep those in mind, and I've given you the link here to Medicare.gov, where it talks about the Get Help program and the Medicare Savings Program, where you can find these benefits and help your client apply for them or tell their parents to do so for them if they need a caregiver to do that. Okay, and then also applying for these typically takes place at the Department of Social Services. Okay, I wanted to stop here just briefly and give you what I call a case management action that you can take to help. One of the key things you can do as case managers is to help your clients maintain health coverage. And this is so critical because without health coverage, they can't go to the doctors and they can't get their case documented. So when they go to apply, if they have no documentation or limited or sporadic documentation, it's just not going to build a good case. So if you can make a point of helping them get connected with Medicaid right away, if they come to you and they don't even have Medicaid, well, now they can apply for Medicaid, as we've talked. So that would be one way to help connect them. So another thing is to make sure that they apply for, all conditions, and that they follow through with all their appointments, and make sure that there are no lapses in healthcare either, because that can really kill a case, as I've suggested. Okay. And records there at the CSB, whether psychiatric or therapeutic, will end up being very important to their case. And I guess maybe all of that is obvious, but I wanted to take a moment to mention it. And then this little picture is to get across what I'm trying to say, which is that your client's case is really only as good as their documentation. They just have to have it. And it's not on their allegation of disability, it's on what the records are saying. Okay. All right, well, we're going to delve into what it takes to be approved and what their evaluation process consists of when determining a case. So we're going to start right from the get-go on step one. Basically, Social Security will start by asking, is the person engaging in SGA, which stands for Substantial Gainful Activity? And the substantial means significant or sustained physical or mental activity. It's work as you and I know it, okay? It's not going up the street and mowing somebody's lawn or helping them babysit their kids for a couple hours, okay? Gainful means competitive work, again, as you and I know it. You apply for the job, you get approved, you pay taxes, and so on, okay? And currently, SGA is $1,260 gross per month. So if they have that or over, they simply don't qualify because they're considered to be non-disabled on the basis of them being able to perform substantial gainful activity. Okay, so that's just the first question they ask. Now, most people aren't going to be working, and that's why they're applying. But some people are still working, maybe even part-time. Okay, they may be right on that border. Okay, so another clue is to take a look at your client's work history. Okay, now it may be that most of your clients are already on this benefit, but if not, look and see if they're sustaining work over this limit, the $1,260 a month. And then you have to explain to them that they're not currently a candidate for this program. However, if you're observing that they're losing jobs repeatedly, even if they're earning over that gainful limit, well, then they're not sustaining the work. And therefore, they may, in fact, be a good candidate for this benefit. So, in fact, the fact that they're losing jobs really indicates that they need this benefit. Okay, so the main thing with this step is that they do have to be under SGA at the time they apply for their application to proceed. All right, step number two, very simply they ask, does this individual have a medical impairment and is it severe? It's kind of a two-step question. Medical impairment, there's a definition for that. The person has to have their physical and or mental condition has to have been diagnosed using acceptable clinical and diagnostic techniques. What this means is that it cannot be currently a set of symptoms that they're getting worked up. They have to have gotten the actual diagnosis. Okay, it has to be a real solid working diagnosis. Okay, and then if they do, the presenting symptoms and limitations of those diagnoses has to pose a severe limitation to work, which simply means that they're really struggling to get work, keep work, and so on. Okay. All right. Now, I guess with this one, what you can do to help is that if you find somebody who's thinking about applying, but they really don't have a diagnosis yet, or it's just really in question, often this happens with young children on the spectrum. It's just not clear until maybe they're 8 or 10. And so they're given sort of other things that may not actually reveal what's going on. Or maybe somebody who has what looks like maybe a bipolar disorder as an adult, but they're having some bouts of depression. They have something that appears like maybe it was a manic episode, but it's just not adding up yet. You can maybe help get some of that nailed down by helping them get some evaluations, okay? All right, now on step 3, and keep in mind, they go through these systematically. So if they have to stop at one step because they don't qualify, then the whole process ends. So if they've gotten to this step, they're going to ask whether or not the impairment has or will last 12 months or end in death, which probably doesn't apply too much to the populations we're talking about. So basically, what you need to understand here is that you're not proving that the disability is permanent. Social Security doesn't have permanent in their lexicon at all. You're really just trying to prove that it's lasted a year or more. Now, obviously, with a severe developmental disability, it's lasted their whole life. So this is kind of an obvious case, and they would pass the 12-month duration mark easily. Now, in the case of somebody with a psychiatric disorder, let's say they are presenting and they've had a bout of depression and maybe even one hospitalization. Well, that isn't going to necessarily constitute a disability. And that's what's really important here, because, you know, you could have the hospitalization and then maybe they move on to outpatient therapy, and by 9 months, they're back stabilized and back to work. So Social Security doesn't give them any benefit of the doubt with these things. It has to be something that's clearly going to last 12 months or has lasted, okay? And incidentally, if somebody's had multiple bouts of depression and hospitalization in 1 year, then that actually would be more indicative of disability. And they might very well meet that 12-month duration requirement. All right, in step 4, they ask, does the impairment meet or equal a listing? Now, hardly anybody gets approved based on equaling. So we're going to focus on meeting a listing. Well, satisfaction of a listing results in automatic approval. So you wonder, well, what's a listing? Well, Social Security has what's called the Blue Book, and they have listings for children and adults under each, you could say, body system. So they have cardiology listings, they have rheumatology listings, but they also have mental disorder listings, which is the one we're concerned about. I have given you the links here to those listings, to the mental disorders for children and the mental disorders for adult. They're very easy to review, and you might want to just glance at those to see if somebody is likely to meet a listing. Of course, it has to be well documented. But next, we're going to actually look at what the mental adult listings look like. And you don't have to study each one of these, but they're basically, I think, 11. And if you glance at them, you know, you can see that they're all of sort of the classic mental health diagnoses. Okay, and the children's listings for mental disorder are identical. There may be one or so that's different, but basically the same. So is it that they just have to have the disorder to meet a listing? No, they have to meet very specific specifications under that listing. So let's look at depression and bipolar disorder. They have, under the mental adult listings, they have A, B, and C. Now, under the A criteria, they have a list of symptoms for depression and then a different list for bipolar. So if you look at those, under depression, it says that you have to have 5 or more of these following symptoms. Okay, all the classic signs of a depression. Now on bipolar, you have to have 3 or more of the following. Okay, but not just that. So that's just for the A criteria. You have to meet the A criteria, and then you have to meet either the B criteria or the C criteria. Now, the B criteria are basically the mental demands required to work. Okay, you have to either have one of these 4 demands to an extreme degree that you can't function, or you have to have a marked limitation in 2. So you don't need to understand the differences between extreme and marked and so on, but it's just to raise your level of awareness that this is the level of scrutiny that your client's case is undergoing, and how they have to look at the records to see what they imply as far as these mental functioning areas. So in all mental disorders, the B criteria are the same. They have to be able to understand, remember, and follow through with what they're told. They have to interact with others properly. They have to be able to concentrate and stay on task. And they have to be able to adapt and manage themselves so they're not inappropriate or causing attention to themselves or being distracted by others. Okay? And then if they don't neatly meet the B criteria, but do meet the A criteria, then they default to the C criteria, which mainly has to do with whether there's been a long and persistent history of these problems. Lots of medical treatment, lots of, interaction with the professional community. Okay. And then I did also want to give you an example of a child listing. They're very similar in how they lay out the listing. But in autism, basically you have A criteria and then you have the B criteria. And the A are just pretty much exactly what you would expect. There need to be qualitative deficits in communication and social interactions, and then the significantly restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And then here again are those 4 essential mental functioning demands that they have to be able to do, even as children, in age-appropriate ways. Okay? All right, now I know those of you who work with clients with substance use disorders are wondering, well, I didn't see a listing for that. And the reason is there isn't. Now, I mentioned I've been doing this 25 years, so I started back in the 90s, and back then actually there was a listing. However, there was a big outcry about it, and people felt that it just wasn't a good, it wasn't a good thing to be subsidizing people who are using. And there were lots of exposés and so on. So it was dropped from this group of listings. However, that doesn't mean that if somebody has drug addiction or alcohol addiction that they can't get a benefit. What it means is that there's going to be an extra step in the process. So if there is any hint in the records that this is a problem, or it has even actually been treated, Social Security is going to make a determination. Now keep in mind that I talked about the person needing a medically determinable condition at step 2. Well, substance use disorder, of course, is a medically determinable condition. You can be diagnosed with that. So obviously they would pass that criteria. But again, there's this extra step. The way this extra step is framed is if the substance use is a contributing factor to their disability, then they won't be approved. Now, a contributing factor means that the real reason they can't work, or maybe the underlying reason, is this substance use. And if that's what the records are suggesting, and even if they were to stop using, okay, they would, or if they were to stop using, if they would still be disabled, then it would not be a contributing factor. Let me see if I can explain that better. If they're using and it's obvious that it's contributing to their disability, they will be denied. But if they stopped using and they still had their other conditions that were considered disabling, then they would be approved, assuming they met all the other criteria. Okay, so this particular ruling is very complex. It's somewhat convoluted, and so I've provided here for anybody who wants to research the ruling further. It's SSR 13-2P, evaluating cases involving drug addiction and alcohol and addiction. Okay. But that's mainly what they're concerned about, is finding out if the use interferes with their ability to work, and then it will be a disqualifier. If not, or if they have become stable in their substance use on a sustained basis, then it will also not be considered a factor. Okay. All right, so moving on, we've got 2 more steps, and I've consolidated them because what these mean is they have not passed to the other steps. So therefore, they did not meet a listing. Because remember, I said if you meet a listing, you're automatically disabled. So they stop the process and approve the case. But if you don't meet a listing, they go on to these next 2 questions. First, they want to know, can the individual perform any of their past work or similar work that they've done in the last 15 years? They're not interested in your entire work history, but just what you've done recently, because those skills may transfer more readily. Okay. Then if they determine you can't do your past work, perhaps it's too stressful, it's an intensive position, or involves interaction with the public too much, and they've decided, no, we get it, you can't do that. But then they have to ask the final question: can they do any other work? And any is the key word here. And in Social Security, any work means any work in the entire national economy. This includes even simple unskilled work. And I guess what's really important about this to understand is that it doesn't matter if you've had professional experience in your background, like in these last 15 years, because they're not interested in compensating you with a benefit if you can't do your professional work. And this is particularly true if you're under 50 years old, you have to be unable to do any work. So, even work at McDonald's, work, handing out tickets at the movie theater, really simple work, unskilled work, sedentary work. You have to be unable to do all of it. Now, let me clarify very briefly that once you hit 50, 55, and 60 years of age, they do relax the criteria at those benchmarks. And so it's easier to get a benefit once you get older. Okay, they add some criteria. Okay, so let's talk about how Social Security defines work. We talked about it being sustained over time and competitive. It's really 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, which is what most occupations require. So if all your client could do is maybe 10 hours or 20 hours, and especially at minimum wage, it's possible you could prove a disability case, okay? Because the work is not competitive or regular. Regular is the key, the 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, okay? Also, if the work is in any way subsidized by the employer, so they're paying them more than they're actually working, or requires any kind of job coaching, that would not be considered competitive work, okay? And in fact, if they required that level of subsidizing or coaching, one could assume that they would meet the criteria, because they're kind of proving their point that they can't work without significant supports. Okay, now, how is child evaluation in disability different? We've talked about adults, and I've mentioned that there are these child listings as well. And so if they do not meet a child listing in the same way, if an adult didn't meet an adult listing, then what? Well, rather than looking at inability to work as they would with an adult, they look at their inability to function as their age-related peers in the context of home, school, and community. So if they're really, really out of sync with what their peers are doing, then that could signal an approval despite not meeting a listing. All right, so we're dealing mainly with the populations you serve as a CSB. So individuals with developmental disabilities, mental health concerns and so on for both children and adults. So we're at the point now where we need to think about what evidence can help support an inability to perform those 4 basic mental demands that we've talked about. And I won't review them here because we mentioned them before when we were talking about the listings. But the key here is, how can we document these very specific problems? Because even if they don't meet a listing, Social Security is still going to look at these functional capacities to see if they meet the criteria. So how do we document these things? Well, there's many ways. Think about, obviously, psychological evaluations and even neuropsychological evaluations often imply these limitations. In fact, neuropsychological evaluations are excellent because they look at the cognitive impacts as well as the psychological impacts. And so with the cognitive, for example, they might be able to really well document a person's inability to concentrate, okay, or pay attention or sustain activity. So those are 2 good things. And then think about the mental status evaluations. Most of you are probably familiar with those. I'm not talking about the quickie 5 question test that they use in a doctor's office with an elderly person maybe, but rather the evaluations that are multi-page and require the case manager or the therapist, most likely, or even the doctor, to respond to specific questions which get at these functional incapacities. Okay, those are excellent. And so if you have a therapist there at the CSB that gets one of these, let them know that these are very helpful and to take care with how they complete those. Also, the therapist's progress notes, and of course the psychiatric progress notes, are really key because they can cite all kinds of problems that the individual may be having on a consistent basis. Another thing is DAR's case notes can be excellent, not only in talking about functional incapacities. In fact, they may have done various evaluations themselves to help learn if that person can work. But once they attempt work, there may be some wonderful examples of what we call unsuccessful work attempts, and their case notes will outline what went wrong. Why did they walk off the job site 2 days in? Why did they get fired? You know, what kinds of problems were they having with coworkers, or staying on task, completing a full day, not showing up regularly? So that could be a goldmine of information. And then another form or option is what's called the function form. So when somebody applies, they're sent a form called function, and they have to tell all about what they do across a day, or of course what they can't do very well. But there's another form called third-party function form, and this is for the parent or caregiver to fill out. It's even possible that somebody, you know, I don't know, I guess even a case manager could fill it out if they're the primary person who knows that individual. And those forms can also provide a goldmine of information as long as they're being accurate in filling those out. I have a question here. What if the child was born addicted and is now exemplifying major behavioral problems, received services starting at 18 months, and now is in the process of child study because of their inability to function? Can this child receive SSI? Well, actually, they should certainly apply, but just understand that there may be a disqualifier if the family earns too much money. Okay, that otherwise they would do a medical determination of that child's limitations and they could well be approved. Okay. And then lastly, doctors often fill out forms for Social Security, but actually they fill them out for the lawyer who's representing them for the hearing, and that can be a gold mine of information as well. So I've listed here Social Security's webpage that takes you straight to their forms. You can actually find the adult function form and that critical third-party function form, print them out, make sure the family or caregiver or someone that knows that person well fills it out to supplement their knowledge of how that person functions. Okay, now this isn't going to come as big news to you. You've been around this long enough to know that denials are common. And I wish it weren't so, but this is the way the system is designed. I guess they hope that you don't appeal, but I'm here to tell you, you must appeal in order to be approved. I would say probably 8 out of 10 cases initially are denied unless they're using some of the suggestions that I've made here, getting things well documented from the start. That may avoid a denial. But let's talk about what are some of the common reasons for denial. Often the evidence is just limited. As I've said, people stop going to the doctors or they don't have health care. The information lacks objective data, so there's no evaluations, which is where you get that objective data. They haven't seen specialists. They're only seeing a primary care doctor who really doesn't treat bipolar or schizophrenia or even autism. And the information on the whole, it just isn't compelling because of those reasons. Also, the claimant may have neglected to list all of their conditions. So Social Security, it doesn't require just one condition. You can list all of the co-occurring or comorbid conditions. And then a claimant may overstate their abilities, particularly in these function forms, and they'll want to say, yes, I cook and I clean and I drive and I socialize, but then this is where that third-party function report comes in. They can kind of qualify, well, yeah, he cooks, but he needs a lot of supervision, and yeah, he goes about and socializes, but needs lots and lots of supports, and so on. So it's really important that they get an accurate picture. Also, inconsistencies can be a case killer. So, you know, if one doctor's saying one thing or one form says one thing and another says another, it's important to keep things consistent. And then you'll remember I said, well, if they can't do their past work, then they consider whether they can do any work. And, you know, they figure, well, surely there's some work they can do. And that's where it has to be proved that there's no work they can do. And often, you know, it's because of those those mental demands that we've talked about. Physically, maybe they could perform anything, even heavy labor, but the mental demands would prevent the consistent, consistent work. Okay. So now the good news with respect to denials, of course, is that you can appeal. And I implied that you really should appeal because it's in the appealing that people ultimately get approved. It typically takes 2 denials before someone is approved. And this second denial involves a hearing. And of course, getting representation, I'm sorry to say, is really quite critical because the judges expect it. So how can someone, you know, figure out these various steps and how to navigate this whole system? I've mentioned earlier our online webpage of Social Security resources, and I'd like to draw your attention back to that. We have some wonderful tips guides. One's tips when applying, another tips when appealing. And you can go over these guides with your client or with their family. They can be printed out. We also, of course, as we've mentioned, we have these INR discussions we can have with people when they call, or there may be a clinic that they could attend, or maybe one of these case manager consults that we hope are going to come online as of October 1st, which I'll let you all know about. Okay, lots of ways to get help. I do have a second question here. What if the child is in foster care with other family member? Is it still based on income? You know, that's an excellent question. And I know that foster families actually get income, I think, from social services, but I don't think it's counted. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that question because it's a good one and I want to make sure I've accurately answered it. So that may be one I follow up with. Okay. And my IT guy has just posted our webpage on Social Security, and it's in the PowerPoint as well. Okay. Now the tips guides that I've mentioned provide a wealth of information about the stages of a claim, the average time it takes to wait for a decision, how many days you have to appeal the decision, and then your options, even if you're denied by a judge. There's actually 2 more levels of recourse. We also provide information about local representation resources. DLCV does not provide representation. Okay. Again, I do encourage you to encourage your client to get representation, and the guide on tips when appealing will explain why. Okay. Now, what about your homeless clients? Really important. Many of you have them. I did some research about this because there used to be one way to do this, and now I think it's different. But SOAR is a wonderful program sponsored by Social Security where they train workers, usually in the CSB system or otherwise, to manage an individual's claim with the idea of expediting it. And of course, if you're homeless or even on the verge of homelessness, you need that claim expedited. So they've trained these workers. Many of them actually work for CSBs, and there should be somebody within your CSB that can tell you how to connect with them if you're not already aware of doing that. But real key that if somebody presents to you as homeless or on the verge of homelessness, that you immediately try to connect them with one of these SOAR workers rather than trying to fumble through it yourself. Okay. And also Georgie Fisher with Virginia SOAR has told me that they're always looking for new workers. And here's the link if you as a CSB case manager would like to consider becoming trained to do this work. Okay, I have a question. One of my programs has an individual who is at the second appeal stage or the hearing. The individual has been receiving support from a SOAR trained staff member. Would you have additional ideas and support for this individual who is going through the hearing? This is the first hearing for the SOAR staff. Excellent question. You know, to my knowledge, SOAR workers are not well trained at the hearing level. I've heard this from SOAR workers themselves. Now, some may have developed some experience along this line, but I see here that this is the first hearing this SOAR staff member has attended. So this would be a really excellent case for one of our clinics because we could sit down with the SOAR staff member, myself, the client, perhaps a family member, and really delve into the weeds on this case and what needs to happen to get them through that hearing and get their benefits approved. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, and I also would be remiss if I didn't tell you how to help keep the benefits in place once they have them. Usually it's a hard-earned fight to get them, and you don't want to lose them. So what do you do to keep the benefits in place? Well, first of all, the review that they undergo, and by the way, everybody undergoes a review because remember I said nothing's permanent here necessarily, is they look at whether or not the person has medically improved. That's the whole purpose of the review. And if they've medically improved, can they now work? Because some people improve, but they're still not able to work according to their definition. So these continuing disability reviews or CDRs occur 1, 3, 5, or 7 years out. And if the person has their very original notice of award, it will actually, there's a paragraph called Things to Remember from Social Security, and it tells them within how many years their case will be reviewed. And so it's good to kind of have a good idea of when that's coming and to anticipate the letter. It's absolutely essential that if they've moved, they update Social Security of their new address, because if they don't get the letter because they didn't notify them, then they will be denied outright. So keeping them up to date with their address is critical. Okay, I wanted to mention too that the COVID-19 was causing a suspension in these reviews. The last 6 months, this has been what's been going on. However, I've heard recently that they have resumed doing reviews. I think it'll be slowly. And so eventually, you know, they'll kind of catch up. So if somebody was expecting one and it didn't happen, that's why. Okay. Now what happens is they get a letter in the mail, and it's usually something they have to fill out the bubbles. And it's very important to just fill out the bubbles and not add a lot of language, because they go through a computer, and the computer decides whether to bump this up to a full review, which is not unlike the initial determination. Okay, so make sure that form goes in if you have an ability to do that. And then, of course, if they are denied, if they end up with one of these bigger reviews and they're denied, here again, all the appeal rights apply. And again, they have the 60 days to appeal. Okay, but now the next thing I tell you is really important. In the fine print of these letters that they get denying their review, or I should say the continuation of their benefits, if they contact Social Security, which now they can do by phone because of COVID, and if they do that within 10 days of the date on the letter, or maybe the date they actually get the letter, they can ask for benefit continuation. And this continuation will occur throughout the entire appeal period, even if it requires several appeals and several years. Many of these do take several years to resolve. So then that during that entire period, they could be receiving their benefit. Now, if in the final conclusion of their case they're denied, they may have to pay back all those benefits, but that's appealable too. And actually they'd have a pretty good case in that they would have hardship paying the back, because they wouldn't have their benefit. Their benefit would end up stopping. So that's something to keep in mind. Within 10 days of getting that denial letter of the review, if they contact Social Security, they can keep their benefit going. If they don't do it within the 10 days, their benefit is going to end. And that they can still appeal, but they're not going to have their benefit in place while they're appealing. Now, the last thing that's kind of important here on these reviews is that it's very difficult to find representation, particularly for a hearing, if one is necessary. And that's because if they keep their benefit in place, so they're continuing to get the cash monthly amount, there's not going to be a retroactive portion out of which a representative can collect a fee. And that's how they're paid according to Social Security. It's on contingency. They have to get the case approved, but then they can take a percentage of this back pay for the period they've been waiting. But the client will have already gotten their pay, and it's just most representatives will not take cases like that. Now, if they weren't able to keep their benefit going, then they may then it may be more reasonable. But just keep that in mind. And that may be another reason to reach out to us. I've handled many cases, particularly under the clinic or in a consult with a case manager and a client who's been denied and they need help with an appeal or a hearing and can't find representation. I've been able to help with those cases. I can't attend the hearing, but I can help them prepare their case. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of reviews, you should also know about the age 18 redetermination. And this would be particularly true for those of you who work with the DD population. And it occurs literally at or about the 18th birthday. So this is only if they had SSI. And the Social Security decision now is not whether they've medically improved, as in a review, but whether or not they meet the adult rules, which are different. as we've already described. Okay, so it's an actual determination. It kicks in around the 18th birthday. With COVID, some of those were delayed, but those will kick in soon. And if they're denied, here again, they must appeal, again, within 60 days. Okay? And so, again, the 10-day rule, if they get denied and they want their benefit to continue while they appeal, they can get in contact with Social Security within 10 days and ask for benefit continuation. Okay? Now, incidentally, if somebody didn't have SSI as a child because of excess family resources, they can certainly apply for the first time at age 18. And this can be very important for anybody who has otherwise had Medicaid as a child, even without SSI, and has a waiver, because you have to keep those waivers going. So they should go ahead and apply right away. And actually, I think it's my next slide that sort of explains, it's very important to, let me go back. It's very important that they try and get approved for the SSI, either through the age 18 redetermination or a new claim at age 18, that they do so by age 19, because at age 19, if not approved by that point, their Medicaid will end, and so will their waivers. So that's a really critical year. So let's talk briefly then about what can be done to help make sure they don't lose their SSI, or they do qualify for it at 18, so they can keep Medicaid, keep their waivers. So one of the actions you can do is to help facilitate them getting updated evaluations, because Social Security is going to be interested in what's going on right now on or around their 18th birthday, not what was going on when they were 16, okay? Because now they're an adult and a lot can change between 16 and 18. So if there's a way to keep those evaluations, particularly those that occur with the school's triennial evaluations, to keep those as current as possible toward the age of 18, that's going to be very helpful. Okay, and there again, if they've been working with a CSB, there's going to be possibly CSB evaluations that could be real current, or you could plan to have one scheduled around the 18th birthday so that the evaluation results can be provided. Okay, so current information is critical. It's also, this is a second action you can take around these case reviews. Make sure that Social Security knows early on, when the review starts, what the client's status is. Because if you know that the client is going to continue in school to age 22, or for example, they convert over to DARS, or maybe both, they're in school and working with DARS as a transition client, well then connection to those groups will secure their benefit. Okay, that will be really, really helpful. Because actually it's very indicative, if you need those ongoing supports and qualify for them, then it sort of supports one's claim of disability. Also, under Section 301, this is kind of a little known rule, but that can be claimed, is if they do get denied at these reviews, and this is even true for an adult later on getting reviewed, if denied, but they are connected with DARS, or in the case of a young person continuing in school, they may get denied, but their benefit continues under Section 301 as long as they're still connected with one of those programs. Okay, so again, these are things to think about, because again, keeping the waivers are just so critical for so many, and that means keeping the SSI and the access to Medicaid. Okay. Just briefly on deadlines, because they're so critical. With COVID-19, there is some lenience on deadlines, but I wouldn't push that too far. the deadline for appeals is always 60 days, and that's from the day you get the letter. I take that back. It's the date on the letter. They actually give you a 5-day grace period that allows for the Postal Service to get the letter to you. So you really have 60 plus 5 days from the date on the letter. Keep in mind that there's such a thing as good cause for late filing. And that often people miss their deadlines. There can be all kinds of reasons for that. COVID maybe could be one of them, and that would be a legitimate reason. But perhaps there's been a hospitalization in the family, or a death in the family, or an accident, or just something kind of catastrophic has happened. It's not just going to be for genuine, forgetfulness, but there could be good cause. And so help somebody claim that, because otherwise they're going to have to start over, and that they lose time that way. Okay. Okay. Now, I think that it would be helpful for you to know that we are still in the time of COVID and the pandemic. And so Social Security offices are still generally closed to the public. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If a person has a dire situation, so their check's been cut off for some reason that they don't understand, or the person, is terminal. There could be several reasons why Social Security would decide it's dire. They might meet you in the office. And they're also handling mail in the office, because lots of people have to submit things for their review. Otherwise, you have to use their toll-free number, which is listed there, and that's to make these appointments. In all cases, this toll-free number is where you make an appointment with Social Security. You never call the local office to make an appointment. And they're open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that gives you a big, long stretch within which to call. They're very busy now because of COVID, but they'll call you back if you leave your name and number. And you could even do that with a client or help them know how to do that. But they have the master calendar of each office located around the country, and they'll make that appointment, and it'll have to be a telephone appointment with Social Security unless it's one of these dire cases, okay? And of course, many, many things can be done online. People can appeal online. Of course, they can apply online in some instances, not all. And there's the website for the Social Security webpage. Okay, so we're moving along. We're actually getting very close to the end. You've been wonderfully patient. And I'd like you to think of DDS as your friend, not DSS, but DDS. I haven't mentioned too much about DDS, but they're Disability Determination Services. They are the state agency that makes the medical decision on somebody's disability claim. So what happens is, I keep mentioning Social Security, but Social Security, all they do is accept the application and then transfer it over to DDS. And they have analysts who review the document, collect and review the documentation, and then make the decision. They're much easier to reach than Social Security. And I've given you the name of their new professional relations officer if you know your client is having a big issue with their local DDS office. This is the Richmond office. And I've given you his email number or address and his phone number with his permission. But you should always start just by calling Social Security, or excuse me, DDS. And you know what? I think I've left that basic number out, so I'm going to have to send that along, or maybe update the slides so when I send the PowerPoint, that number will be there. I'll give it to you now. It's 804-367-4700. That is the number to DDS. And when you call there and ask to speak to the analyst handling this person's claim, as long as you're with your client or the client can call on their own behalf, they'll talk to the actual person handling their claim. You can find out, have they gotten this final evaluation, or what's the status all kinds of things that you can do with that DDS office. Okay, they're pretty user-friendly. Okay. I also need to take a moment to explain about representative payee. Most of you who have clients on any one of these programs will likely have a representative payee. This is the person who manages their funds because the individual cannot, for whatever reason, due to their disability. Well, I don't know if you knew this, but in the last couple of years, all of the protection and advocacy agencies around the country, including ours, are charged by Social Security now to conduct reviews of payees, these people who manage other people's funds. There are institutions that manage funds. There are individuals who manage funds, or just groups of people who do this. And so we do about 120 reviews a year. And basically, we're looking at protecting beneficiaries from financial exploitation and other abuses that may be occurring by their payee. And we want to ensure that the funds are being used properly and in the best interest of the beneficiary. And incidentally, we haven't mentioned the stimulus check, but you know, that check is supposed to be used directly by the beneficiary. It is not for the use of the representative payee. They don't get to keep that or decide how to use it, okay? So anyway, there can be all kinds of abuses, and if you happen to know of what appears to be an abusive situation or a client actually shares about one, you can have them call us, or you could call us with them and report the abuse that you suspect or the neglect or misuse of funds, and we will possibly open up a case to explore this and try and have a remedy for this situation, okay? We have a web page now on the representative payee program with frequently asked questions for the payees and the beneficiaries, and that can be very helpful information. Okay, best advice ever, and this is specific to beneficiaries. Okay, so all of what you've done to help somebody get approved, or you've stood by and watched them, eventually get approved. What can you tell them to help them protect their benefit? Well, benefits planning is a thing, and maybe you know about it. But I recommend it because it's so essential that if anybody is even mildly interested in attempting work while receiving a benefit, they simply must understand how wages will impact their benefit. And benefits planning is what helps them understand that. So they can explain with an SSI recipient, if you earn $800 a month, you're going to have up to $400 taken away from your SSI. And then, if you're an SSDI beneficiary, they can explain how working and wages will impact that benefit. And they'll also understand how the work incentives work and can be used to help somebody earn even more. Also, they can help them know how to report, how and when to report, which is critical. So the benefits planning piece is so very important. DARS automatically does benefits planning, to my knowledge, once somebody becomes a client, because they want to make sure that they don't get a benefit and then rapidly lose it because they weren't following the rules, once they start working. The other organization is Virginia Access, and in Richmond, I've listed her name, number, and email address. Beth Kirchner is the Virginia Access person who is trained by Social Security to understand ticket to work, work incentives, and they do benefits planning. So the person has to be interested in work, moving in that direction. But if they're not associated with DARS, then they would be a good candidate for Virginia Access. Okay, and the main thing they can do is help somebody avoid the dreaded overpayment. Okay. All right, we're moving very close to the end of this training. I just want to remind you that it's still pending, but there is a pretty good chance that starting October 1, I am going to be able to do Social Security case consultations with you because you've now attended this training. And again, it would be with you and your client. And we would do this probably using the Zoom format because we're not really doing in-person visits right now or in-person meetings. But you can, fax us or email us information in advance to review, and we can go into depth on an individual's case. And the way you would do that is you would simply call me. That's my direct number or my email. And let me know what the need is, and we can arrange the actual consultation. Okay. I hope I haven't misspoken. I would be very doubtful if the board would not approve these. I guess there's a chance, but I'm hoping they will be approved. And I will certainly let you know after the 1st of October if they go forward. Okay. And that can really help solidify your knowledge that you've learned today. I do have another question here. How can we find out if the client actually received his or her stimulus check? The pay is saying that they did not get it. However, most of my other clients did. Well, they should have gotten it because the way the IRS had this set up, they had multiple provisions for this very thing. If the person was a beneficiary of SSI or SSDI, they would automatically get the check. So if they didn't get it, it kind of raises a red flag for me. And you could maybe contact the IRS to try and find out. They have getmyrefund.org, I think is the link to finding out, and they have to be with you and supply the information. Okay, because see, the thing is, everybody gets their check by direct deposit now, either onto a debit card or into a bank account. So Social Security provided all that information to the IRS, so it should have been seamless. It took longer to get it, I'll grant you that, but most everybody should have their check by now. Okay. Now, last, I just want to end on this because, all of you work, and many of you may not know that you can find out what your Social Security account looks like by simply going to ssa.gov/myaccount. I think it can be very helpful and maybe provide some perspective for you. As you're earning wages, you'll see the amount that you would qualify if you became disabled or when you retire, and what that amount looks like as it goes up. There's a benefit estimate statement, and then there's also a earnings record, so you can check your earnings against it and make sure that they have your proper earnings and so on. So I just like to let people know about that, and hope that you can do that. And I guess to end, I'd like to just give you our little banner here, Disability Law Center. This is our address. We're over on Willow Lawn Drive, not far from any of you. And we do honor walk-ins right now. We have special advocates that are able and ready to take an individual. And we're using all kinds of precautionary methods due to COVID. So at the present time, we are taking walk-ins, but mostly calling Monday, Wednesday, Friday between 8:30 and 4 is best. Okay. My assistant is going to put into the chat box the evaluation tool that I have. And while he's doing that, I'm just going to ask, are there any more questions? Take your time. We've actually got 5 minutes, so I'm just going to sit tight here. And if you've got a question brewing in your mind and want to put it out there, I'm happy to answer it. I know we've covered a lot of material. All right, so he's just posted the evaluation, and it's very straightforward. Basically asks, what did you know before? What do you know now? And if you would take a moment even now to fill that out, I would really appreciate that. If you have to hop off, we're going to send it as well through Daniel or Gabriella, and they'll get it out to you. You'll also get a copy of this PowerPoint to review, and of course the recorded version. So both of those will be useful to you, and you can keep the information handy, maybe on your desktop. I think that ends our training. But again, I'm going to stay here a few more minutes to answer any questions. But thank you all for coming. I really hope that this has been helpful, and I hope I hear from many of you. Thank you for attending. Ooh.